Your packet this week talks about how you can make observations in a scavenger hunt style to look at different types of plants in your community, in your ecosystem. And there are two types of plant systems. On page 29, they start talking about these two types. And you can read what they have on that page, but this is a brief overview of that information. So there are two different types of plants, vascular plants and non-vascular plants. I want to think of vascular plants like, I think of vascular as like veins. And if you have ever seen like your veins in your hands and like notice that it connects all the way up your arm, right? It's connecting and flowing blood all through your body. Just like that, a plant has vascular tubes, similar to like our veins, that carry water all the way from their roots here at the bottom, through their stem and leaves, and then if they have flowers, all the way up to the flowers. So vascular plants are ones that you are more likely to notice around you, unless you're in an area that has a lot of water or a lot of tree cover like a forest. So vascular plants are going to be any kind of flowering plant. Think about dandelions, weeds, daisies, even pretty flowers that you may have in a garden. Vegetable plants like tomato plants. Trees are vascular plants. Think about it this way. If the tree didn't have roots and tubes taking it all the way up to the top, how would those leaves live? Leaves need the water in order to live. So they have to have a vascular system, those vascular tubes, that carries the water all the way from the roots up through the stem and finally to the leaves. And you may be thinking, well, then all vascular plants are big or are like off the ground. But that's not true, because even grass is a vascular plant. If you were to dig up your grass, which please don't, because I'm sure someone would be unhappy with that, but if you were to dig up your grass, you would see that there are actually grass roots that you will be pulling up when you pull that plant up. Different than vascular plants, you have non-vascular. Remember that non just means not. So it just means that they're not vascular plants. They do not have those vascular tubes. And vascular plants have to be in a water source or really close to a really wet area like a forest, where forest has a lot of trees covering it, and so the ground, you'll notice if you ever walk through the forest, sometimes there's a lot of wet leaves and wet dirt, and that's because it doesn't get a lot of sun to dry it out. So you might have noticed in your yard or when you've taken walks or hikes, moss. Moss is a very common non-vascular plant that you see, or algae on rocks or on trees. And then there are other types that are common that you guys may not have seen, which is liverwort, hornwort, anything that kind of sounds gross I found is a non-vascular plant, and then moss and algae. And that does not have a vascular system. If I were to pull that moss up from the ground, it doesn't have any roots, and it's just absorbing water from the air around it. So I did an experiment to see how a vascular plant carries water from its roots all the way through the tubes inside it to its leaves. I found that celery works best for this, or if you have white carnations, which are a type of flower. But if you don't have anything like that, you can do what I did. I just picked some wildflowers that I saw growing up in the grass as I took a walk, and I picked some of those. Once you pick the flowers, you want to put them in a cup of water with some food dye. So you can see I dyed it purple. Purple I found just made the flowers blue. But what happens with vascular plants is that because they have those vascular tubes, they're sucking the colored water up the vascular tubes until they get to the flower part. Now, unfortunately, my flowers did not really like being inside. They didn't last very long. But you can actually see, if I were to look close, there's some blue lines on the outsides of the flower that just shows that the flower took the dye up the stem and into the vascular tubes in the actual flower part. I really saw it well when I captured this kind of dandelion thing, and I kept the roots intact. So if you do that, you'll see a better result, because it's actually can use the roots to take the colored dye up. And so I know it's vascular because it has these root systems and root stems. And where I saw the purple actually came in the stem and on the edges of the flower. You could see that they have like a bit of a bluish color, a bluish like hint to them. And then the pollen part, where the dandelion is, was a little bit blue at the ends. I found that lighter colored plants do a better job being able to show the food dye, but you might experiment with different plants and how the food dye affects them, different colored plants or different types of plants, to see what happens. The cool thing about celery, if you do this experiment with celery, is you can actually cut it open right in the middle and see those vascular tubes that have been dyed the color that you choose. So have fun with that, play around with that this week. That's a vascular experiment that you can do at home. Alright guys, I'm going to show you one thing that you could do when you're home. Of course, remember, safe social distancing, but anywhere where you have a green space with plants and trees, you can go on a vascular and non-vascular hunt. So if you're looking for a vascular plant, you're looking for anything with roots, a root system, and usually these are plants that are going to grow a little taller because they need the roots in order to bring the water all the way up to the leaves. But that's not always the case. So we're going to go on a bit of a vascular and non-vascular hunt. So as I look around, I see some flowering plants. Those are going to be vascular. If I were to dig those up, which I'm not, then I would definitely see a root system there, because I know they need water in order to bring the water to the flower so the flower part doesn't die. You need roots and a stem to bring that water straight up those vascular tubes. And not everything is going to be large like those plants or like trees. Even grass is vascular. So if I go over here to an area that's exposed, don't dig up your grass, because I'm sure whoever, wherever you are, they're not going to be very happy with you digging up your grass. But if you can find an area that's open, you can usually see, like here's a bit of a root, and if I were just to kick it a little bit, I would see some exposed root stems. So any kind of flowers, but also grass is a vascular plant because it does need roots in order to get that water all the way up to the tip of the grass. If I'm looking for non-vascular plants, I want an area that has a lot of moisture or not a lot of sunlight. So this is going to be usually like an area in the shadow. Like here I have something under a fence, so it's in the shadow, and I have moss. If I pick this moss up, ignore the dog barking in the background, you see that there are no roots on the bottom of this. That's because it is a non-vascular plant. It has no roots, and it's absorbing moisture, water from the air. So it likes an area with a lot of moisture. So that's going to be like in the woods. You'll see moss on trees because they're covered from the sun, or like this is in the shade from the fence. Here are the most common types of vascular plants: bushes and little trees or tall trees. And I know that those bushes or this tree all the way up would not get any water up to those branches or those leaves or needles if it didn't have a root system that could bring it all the way up. And actually, if I were to come closer, if you're just taking a walk around and looking for vascular plants, and the trees usually have some areas that are uneven. It's covered up by pine straws here. But if I were to walk down here, it would be really bumpy. And that's because a lot of times the roots, part of the vascular system, are sticking up out of the ground. And so you can actually see that trees are vascular.